Comments will be fast, I'll be quick. I think on 8.3b6, page 44, any floodway area, this may be FEMA language, should be regulatory floodway area, because there is a distinction in that. I mean, regulatory floodway is FEMA language, the word regulatory. I took that from FEMA stuff. However, any floodway is up to a major difference in interpretation.
Yeah, I noticed you used regulatory, and I figured there was a specific reason. The one thing I'm saying to all the people here is that there are many streams within your county that you need to encourage FEMA to map. Because the problem in this ordinance is everything falls into the zone, the approximated zone. Because it's just not mapped. So that causes different ramifications on how the ordinance is enforced and what legal standards are applicable to the situation, because evidently FEMA hasn't mapped all these streams.
How do you get FEMA to map your stream?
Pardon me?
How do you get FEMA to map your stream?
I have no idea.
It's called a letter of map.
I've got sneezing.
Congressman.
Send a letter to Senator Manchin.
You don't have to do that either. You haven't talked about it before. You can do a conditional.
Kevin.
Where were you referring to the last comment?
8.3b6. Ma'am, there are provisions you can do that. It actually talks about it's called conditional letter of map revision and things like that. There are things you can do. And one of the suggestions we had is, because I looked into that process, one suggestion I believe you added on was, in order to get that changed by anybody, you have to have cooperation from the county and the community to do that. And one of my suggestions, I think Don adopted, was, okay, if I go do it, Dan has to support it as a floodplain administrator. If you go do it, they have to bless it, because that's required under those regulations. So we added that in there.
And the language that was added was that
it was word for word, and that was copied and pasted from the bulletin as to how to do it.
Right. The floodplain manager would support the effort of the citizen, whether the citizen be a corporation or a resident person, to get that CLOMA letter.
It's a CLOMAR, which then turns into a LOMAR, CLOMR. You can't do it without the blessing of the community, so or whoever's responsible.
I'm sorry, what were you, what was your notation about
page 44?
8.3b6?
Page 44, 8.3b6, we propose changing the phrase any floodway area to the regulatory floodway.
That's what I meant.
Anything you get busy, you start mapping your streams, right?
I don't see that.
My next specific comment, and I think that's all I'm going to have. Folks probably are tired of hearing my voice by the time you get home.
Yes.
And is the amount of the penalty. And I appreciate the fact there should be a penalty. A couple things I don't understand is it's not proportionate to other fines for misdemeanors in West Virginia.
It is not.
The prior ordinance only had a $500 penalty. Zoning ordinance violations, which are set forth in the West Virginia Code, says $500. There's also a provision which allows you to submit someone to jail for 10 days. I'm not sure you have the authority to do that. You may and likely do have some authority to do a reasonable misdemeanor fee. I'll submit to you, I don't think you have legal authority to jail someone. I will into it. The separate offense provision for each day in violation is excessive. I think that if there is going to be a separate offense, it's not fair unless they're notified of the violation. I mean, you may put a propane tank in your yard. Let's talk about that again. If you put that in your yard in violation, it's been there for a year and a half after this ordinance. I mean, you can spend $500 a day for each violation. That's absurd. Bless you. If Mr. Wellings comes to your house and says you're violating that you got X days to cure, and if you don't do that after that time, that's what you should attach. Otherwise, the penalties are just going to add up. There should also be a provision that if there's a violation, bless you, Mr. Wellings could enter a stop work order and then give someone time to file a permit application and come into compliance with it without getting subject to further penalties if they're trying to come to compliance with the law. I think those are just things that helps everyone. Finally, and to extend you guys have any other questions, again, we appreciate the adoption of the comments we previously submitted. 5, 6, or 7 of them probably just got rejected by FEMA, and that's okay. But there are still significant provisions, specifically the fees and timeframes, that I just think will hold up and challenge you guys need to think about seriously. I am sincere when I say that a lot of our comments are not directed specifically to the oil and gas industry. There are many things that we chose specifically not to put in here because we recognize you guys have rights to object. You have interest in your property. We understand that. We all live in West Virginia. Most of us, I think everybody in this room probably does. Most of us live by some stream. I grew up with the creek across my house. You know, I grew up the holler on the dirt road with the creek across the house. My dad was a coal miner. So I understand your concern. But what we want to do is get a fair ordinance for everyone. Not just the oil and gas industry, not just other industries. For Tammy, for Mrs. Huff, for you, Diane, for you, Mr. Foster, for developers, home builders. There are a lot of people that are going to be affected by this. And it is a big job, and I don't envy you, Dan, to have to do it. But what I don't want this to turn into, and I appreciate the animosity that some of you have toward the oil and gas industry. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I can't say that I don't understand where you're coming from. But the reality of it is this cannot become an ordinance that just attacks the oil and gas industry. Cannot do that. We want to be a good citizen. As we talked earlier, we were the first to file a floodplain permit application in the state for an oil and gas plant. We were the first people to do it in Dodge County. For better or worse, you guys can thank EQT for us being here today to try to work it out to make it right. And Mrs. Huff, or maybe Mr. Foster, right? So we hope and trust that you'll consider our comments carefully and appreciate your time. It's getting late, that's fine. I'll stay here as long as we need to. Any other questions, anybody? To me or?
Not to you.
Okay, I can sit down.
It's okay with me.
All right. You're calling the shots. Right.
So I'm wanting, Dan, if you want to comment, if you don't want to comment on this, I would understand that. But I've heard the gas fellow talk about compressing timelines, notification. They want to cut the 90-day processing time that Dan has to do it right. He wants to cut in half to 45 days. We've already known that we've come from, I don't know what the analogy was, a one-horse show to the World Series. And Dan, how do you feel about your time to do it right and protect the citizens of the county with the 90 days being cut in half? If you want to comment on that, I'd be interested.
Well, this is all going to be a due process. So it's kind of tough for me as we speak right now to say what the timeline will be. I would like to start with anyway of having that option should things develop or whatever. I don't foresee it ever taking 90 days to do anything like that. But I can't tell everything we're going to get into with this new can of worms we're opening up here. I mean, I haven't went through this process with everybody yet. So, at this point, I like the idea of having a little coochie to myself to do it, okay? Until we're familiar with the process, we've got it in place, we see how it's running, then I'll know a lot more.
What would happen if, for example, you had to have surgery and you're out for like 6 months or 3 months? What kind of, is there somebody that takes your place and makes
Ralph, head of the county commission. Ralph.
You do it. That move won't need 90 days when you're out.
Yeah, no, because I see when it's just one, it's not like one in office, it's not one in office, it's one in person that's, got to do all this stuff.
Yeah, just so everyone understands, the original ordinance from FEMA had no time limits. There was no time constraints at all. And we have adopted in the new fourth revision this 90-day time frame because we heard industry speak that they wanted, and there should be some time frame. I know Dan's going to do his work timely, but if Snead takes this and promulgates it on the other 54 counties, there'll be some floodplain managers that won't do their work on time. And they might be sitting there for half a year or 9 months. What I need to do, in all honesty, is to go back to everything that we're requiring people to do and sit down and map out what time is going to be utilized. And to understand it, frankly, I think 90 days, not to exceed 90 days is language that's pretty concise and tight. But we'll give consideration to the issues of how much time it's going to take to do certain things.
Yeah, it's my understanding that, and with all due respect, I'm not just trying to plow through it. I mean, Mr. Foster, I believe, agrees with me that the time period needs to be sped up. And is that what you told me, Mr. Foster?
The process needs, that's one of the things, the fallacies of government. It takes forever to get anything done. And this process should be expedited. I don't say do it overnight or anything, but when you get an application, start working on it.
Well, the problem, with the expedition of it, or the expediting it, is that people need notice, and that's what the court had the primarily problem with.
I'm not going to take that away.
Yeah, but I think we've tried to do that in the ordinance. The one thing that makes it hard to calculate all the dates on for Doddridge County is tying some of the dates to the idea of an announcement at your county commission meeting, because that may be...
They can bump it back a month.
Yeah.
2 different announcements can knock it back 28 days.
Right,
26 days.
Exactly. So it's not as clean as doing a blast email to everyone and starting the time frame from there. But I do appreciate that your primary communication process is through your county commission meeting.
Well, since we don't have a daily paper, is there anything to keep this from being sent to, like the Clarksburg paper and used?
Not everybody gets it. It's not,
Everybody don't get
not
the
classified as
Yeah,
legal paper.
I'm not confident. I haven't seen the numbers as to what their saturation is into Doddridge County is, and we all know that what's happening across the nation is daily paper consumption is going down. It's going by way of the dying horse. I mean, it's people just don't buy. Even in I'm so amazed that the people that I know that are attached to their iPad, they're reading perhaps national news, maybe some local news, but people don't buy the newspaper anymore.
But you can read it online.
Yeah, but some papers only put certain articles online. You can't read the whole newspaper, and they may choose not to put this article online. So it's not as consistently tight as you would like it.
And legal announcements aren't.
The West Virginia Code has uniform legal advertising language about how things are to be done.
Right.
And I'm not saying that couldn't be changed, but everybody's used to dealing with that. And I think that if you vary from that, it could cause. I'm not saying you couldn't vary from it. You gotta study it hard before you do.
Yeah, as an attorney, I'm just not confident that like a Class 2 advertisement, even though that's the current statutory requirement, gets the news out to everyone. I'm just not confident that people read those classified ads. I know I don't. I never read them. I've not read one. I've looked for ones that I've placed, but I don't read them on a daily basis.
I look for myself in the obituaries, and that's it.
Is this in the record? This meeting tonight?
I couldn't help when Mr. Sneed was talking and giving us the 7 things that FEMA wanted changed, that quite a few of them were things that the industry actually made the comments and they were included. And when Mr. Hastings just said how he wants the language changed from a floodplain to a FEMA floodplain, I think if you're going to change that language, you should keep the moratorium on the floodplain permits until all the residents can get that designation that needed.
Well, I don't have a problem. I mean, if you're going to get that with, that's a big issue because it can take years.
Well, you're
quite frankly,
change the language to that.
Well, it's going to have to be approved. Whatever language is suggested, it has to go.
That's what I'm saying.
It has to go. FEMA would have to approve it.
Well, I'm saying if they approve your language, then we should get the time to get that designation. If
Well-
not, leave it at just flooding areas.
Without going into the debate, the legal debate, whether the moratorium has any legal effect, you're already subject to another lawsuit.
So what, that's by a company that drilled in the
I
floodplain
understand.
that did not have a floodplain permit.
I understand. What I'm saying though is, at some point in time, everybody needs to be able to get back to developing the floodplain, whether it's industry or person.
That's just.
And it needs to be done the right way. And if there's an ordinance that complies with FEMA technical requirements, that's what we need to go by. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
That's it.
I'll follow Mr. Hastings' example. So now that we heard for over an hour from the industry, I would really invite people from the community to come up with their point-by-point objections or changes to the language. A couple that I have are, I don't see the protections that are in place. For example, from flooding, from messing with the floodplain. I mean, I thought we weren't supposed to mess with the floodplains. Why would a permit then make it okay? Protections for drinking water quality, which the drilling through the floodplains has made problems in a lot of other areas in the United States. How about protections for us about not being able to get a mortgage for somebody to buy our places when we want to sell them? If people can't get a mortgage to buy our places, soon all we'll have here is industry. We won't have our community. Protections from roads being ruined, or for the traffic that we can't get out of our hollow road because it's lined up with trucks trying to drill in the floodplain. I think here we've got a problem of magnitude. A can of charcoal lighter fluid in the floodplain is not representative of the gallons and gallons and thousands of gallons of toxic chemicals that go into a well. I don't think that the oil and gas makes good neighbors. I don't think they care about our communities and our life. And as far as I'm concerned, I would like the process to go way slower and just slow it down. I invite other people to come up with their comments.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I know I'm not a certain member of the community, but I just had 5 points that I'd like to make. If the commission's still willing to hear comments.
We're willing to hear comments all night.
Industry.
I think we beat the dead horse with regard to the qualifications of a floodplain administrator. The current statute, though, provides that the president of the county commission can fill in, and the only suggestion that I would offer is that some language be added to make that on a temporary basis. I think we talked about
We
why.
included that in the 5th.
That's been included in the 5th. Okay, thank you. Moving right along to section 4.1, subsection B, which sets forth certain requirements that must be met in order for work to be completed in a floodway. Subsection A sets forth that there must be hydrologic and hydraulic analysis to ensure that the proposed encroachment will not result in an increase to the base flood elevation. That adequately regulates when things can happen in a floodway, and I think that subsection B is probably unnecessary. Now, subsection B focuses on reasonable alternatives. And to the extent subsection B is to be included, I just think that reasonable alternatives is a vague term and would have to be better defined so that folks are aware of what can and cannot be done and what qualifies as a reasonable alternative. With regard to section 4.4, subsection B, and section 4.5, subsection B, those talk about hydrologic and hydraulic analyses, and they provide that those can be carried out by a professional engineer. It's our position that typically those things are done by a professional geologist who are registered with the American Institute of Professional Geologists. So I would just submit, I know that their geologists are covered by the definition of professional. I would just request that professional geologists be included in those two subsections, because they're normally the ones who are carrying out those sorts of analyses. I think it makes a little bit of sense.
Both of those go back to the original FEMA language. That's the only problem.
Okay.
I mean, you're really...
I don't know that FEMA would have I don't know what FEMA's position would be on that. I don't know that they'd have a problem with someone who is commonly responsible for carrying out those sorts of tests. I would imagine it would be, but then again, who am I to say what FEMA says and doesn't say?
Our short experience with FEMA is if you change any word, they don't want it changed. So I mean, I appreciate your comment, but I don't know that it's going to go very far.
Geographer or geologist?
I kind of disagree.
Geologist.
Usually it's the civil engineers or hydrologists that's doing these.
Not a geologist.
They certify it. Yeah. You may have other.
You may have some interns.
Someone else does the test, they certify.
Certainly it's someone other than an engineer.
But the issue I have with that one is the fact that, are you doing a computer-generated study or is it an actual field study? Because having lived in this region for 32 years, how things react will not necessarily go along with a computer-generated study.
Your comments to them, not to me. I mean, the statute provides that you're dealing with hydrologic or hydraulic analyses. That's the terms the statute uses. So I'm not here to dispute or agree with that comment. The next provision, 6.1, and I know that Steve touched on this very briefly. 6.1 subsection I3, and that's under the storage provision. That particular subsection deals with materials that, quote, resemble fill, shall not be considered storage. I think fill is adequately defined in the earlier section of 6.1. It's defined as soil or rock material. And then it's adequately regulated with regard to what can and cannot be done with fill. Materials that resemble fill is vague, and I think there needs to either be some meat put on the bones as to what that means. There's no definition currently as it stands, and I also think that if you're dealing with fill, there's a whole section devoted to fill that outlines how you need to address and handle fill materials. I think that was the bigger points that I wanted to make. I just wanted to be brief. I know we've been going for a long time. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anybody else got anything?
I just have a comment about the notice to surface owners that any shortening of the time that's given would be unacceptable. It is really hard to get notice when something's going to happen on your property. I know for people that teach when they have the summer off, it's not unusual to have a 2 or 3 week absence when you're visiting family in a different part of the country. And so to shorten that time, and I also wonder, couldn't there be a regulation that if that person is not reached, or if there's no response from that person, does that just negate your right to be notified? Because I can certainly see that that would be a situation where it would be like having no right if there was no response, but yet they just went ahead with it. So I would like something to be included to protect that right of notice, that there really be a response from the landowner. Yes, I've received this, I see what's going on, and then you have the opportunity to do your part in it. So that's a real important
Can I respond to one specific issue, just so you know? I don't know if you've read the ordinance with as much detail as we have, and that's no disrespect. I'm getting paid to break it apart and do that. There is a provision in that ordinance that suggests if you can't get certified mail, you can't get personal service by the sheriff, that publication notice is sufficient. And that is consistent with other types of services in West Virginia law. I mean, at some point in time, you got to say everybody's made every reasonable effort. And the proposed ordinance notice requirements and what you have to do to notify people are overly broad, quite frankly, and more inclusive than other notice provisions. So I just wanted you to know that. I mean, what they're doing on that issue is more than anybody else does. And they're doing it all at once, basically. They're doing publication at the same time a certified mail. So I mean, there is a provision, and I understand that, but at some point in time, you know, what if you go away for a year? I mean, at some point in time,
I'm not talking about a year, but I am talking about coming home after being away for 2 or 3 weeks and finding a pad in my floodplain.
Well, and I understand that. I understand.
It's a big life.
But again, it's from the beginning of the. I would submit to you, if you're going 2 or 3 weeks, you have 20 days. There's an objection period. There's everything. He's not going to make a decision that fast because there's objection periods and things like that. So it's probably not. I'm not saying it won't affect you, but it's probably not going to be as you think it may be, given the way it's set up. I think. And you don't have to believe me.
10.
Pardon me?
Then you're saying there's no reason to shorten it to 10.
I'm not saying that. We still would like shorten to 10 or shorten the other time periods, one or the other.
Under the law, it is correct that at some point you have to cut it off. I mean, you just can't take all these personal nuances of when you may be away. But what I would suggest to you, and this is, we have to rely on our neighbors. And hopefully one of your neighbors would get wind of this and you would have some understanding with them that if they get a notice of something like this, that they would give you a call. You know, we just can't, you just have to cut it off at some point. And the way that it has been done in West Virginia for probably 150 years is this idea that you put the advertisement in the newspaper and that cuts it off.
I would also add that because we have the requirement to get the floodplain permit, even the conditional permit, before getting the drilling permit, you get a different notification period of time for the permit application for a drilling permit. So effectively, you're going to get a lot more time of some notice. So you're going to know somehow, some way.
I guess I'm just feeling that as a surface owner, I really need to know what's going on. I don't care how much time it takes. I've lived on my land for 30 years. I want to know what's going on it and have some period to comment.
I understand.
I'm back to this timing thing. If you send me a certified letter, what day does notification start? The day that you send the letter or the day that I receive the letter?
The day you sign for it. Yeah, it's a good one. It varies.
I would say the day the notice went out to you from the post office. It's dated at the post office the day they.
And it's got to be whenever it's accepted on most
Well,
things.
you bring up a good point. To be honest with you, I put my ordinance in my bag at this point because my brain's about shut down. I was very quick for probably 5 hours of answering all these questions from memory. But you bring up a good point that I'll have to look at closely, and that is it correctly and adequately defined when your objection period individually would begin?
I'm almost certain, I'm not 100% sure, but it's 20 days from the date of notification.
I believe in the draft that just went out, it states that it's when the county clerk receives the card back in her hands, that's when it starts.
Well, then you have, what, 14 days on one of those letters, or 10 days?
Yeah.
That it can set and wait before you go sign
That's
for
the
it?
concerns that we have. I mean, at some point in time, you know.
So there's your 10 days, okay? And whenever you get home, you'll have a card in the mailbox that says that you have a package or a letter, and you can go ask, so.
Yeah, what you're saying, ma'am, I'll have to talk to the U.S. Postal Service. What you're saying is that if they come out and attempt to serve you and you're not there, that they may actually hold the mail at the post office before they fill out the failure to serve notice that would come back to the clerk.
I think it's
When
10
it
to
arrives at
14
the post
days.
office, the notice goes out the first day. If you're not there and get your letter, 5 days later you get a second notice, and on the 15th day it is returned.
Okay.
So there's 15 days.
Yeah, so that needs to be, we need to work on that.
So I really did have some comments I wanted to make, but I didn't know how many other people were still, are we giving up?
You
Because
take the mic.
everybody's
Mrs. Huff, you take the
packing
mic.
up.
Take the mic.
Please.
We're here.
Take it.
We're here for you.
Okay. I'm not going to cover everything, but I'm going to give you all my comments, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, should I have gotten Mrs. Wilson? I can go back and
My
get you
husband's
one.
going to be crazy.
Okay. I'm not going to cover everything that's on here because some of the things that are on here, Mr. Tennant, are misspelled words or things like that, which you'll find when you go through it. So I didn't, but on page 1,